But with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Alex Hall. I am, let's see, as I go in, 1 second, I'm going to go in. There we go. My name is Alex Hall. I'm an admissions counselor here at the University of Washington. I use he, him pronouns, and it is my sincere pleasure to welcome all of you today to this Washington Wednesday about maximizing your college search. We have two wonderful college admission professionals who are on the call with us today. Each of them is going to talk about their expertise and work that into what makes a great college list and how to start building yours today. So we have Mario Arala Molinero, who is at Shorecrest High School. He is a college and career readiness coordinator. And then we also have Derek Rogers, Director of College Counseling at Rainier Scholars. So thank you both, Derek and Mario, for joining us today. I'm going to step back for a moment. Mario, if you would like to kick us off, I'm going to be using the slides as well too. So just let me know, just say next slide if you want me to go to the next slide. But Mario, this is all you.
You got it. Well, thanks again, Alex. Derek, it's nice to see you again. And hello, everyone. I am so excited to share space with you today as we talk about something rather important, and that's choosing the right school for you. As you think about your next chapter, as you think about sort of the next steps, I'm excited that to kind of give you a taste of some questions and things for you to think about as we kind of move forward. And as Alex mentioned, I do work at Shorecrest High School, which is in Shoreline. Prior to that, I worked at Western Washington University for about 8 years doing enrollment, talking about what fit means to you. So again, I'm excited to be able to help you as you kind of guide, again, choosing that right school for you. So if we can turn to the next slide, that would be great. So again, as you start thinking about that next step, as you start kind of writing down things, and I know you could be in the boat of, hey, I actually have my Google Docs already made. I already have my categories already figured out, to actually, I'm just starting where to begin. So a couple of questions that that I think are rather important for you as you kind of think about your next step is, first, where, right? Where in terms of, are you thinking of in-state? Are you thinking geographically? Are you thinking about, hey, I want to be close to home here in Seattle or wherever you're from? And or are you thinking, maybe I want to do the East Coast, even though here we think West Coast is the best coast? Or is it more like, maybe I want to go out of state, if it means going out of country? I had the opportunity to work with quite a few folks about working out of state, but again, where? The second one is, again, is how many schools are you thinking about? I know quite a few. I think the average a couple of years ago was like 12 to 15 schools is where how many students were applying to. And every year I get students applying for about 10 plus schools. Now that could range from public to private. It could mean sort of, we can get more in the weeds about the reach schools, or schools that are like, I don't know if my package is going to be as competitive at this particular school, but also thinking about schools like reach, schools that are like, what, this is my safety school, I feel very comfortable here, and or schools that are like, what, I got this in the bag for sure, right? And of course, each school that you think about has its own sort of trait and also really beautiful reputation there. So again, how many schools? Now I interpret what in terms of like programs that are there, right? What programs that they offer. It could be computer science, if you're STEM focused, what kind of programs that they have that are an interest of yours. I think that's a rather important thing. What could be, hey, maybe I'm in sports, maybe there's a particular arts or club or program department that is really calling to me. One of my favorite stories is when I was at Western and someone's like, I can't wait to join your football team. And I was like, we don't got no football team. I don't know what you're talking about. And they were like, I thought you had a football team. It's like, actually, we don't. So making sure that you're studying on that. And of course, a really, really big question as you're kind of guiding through the conversations with not only yourself and your family is how much each school is, right? And what's going to be that final cost, which I know my colleague Derek is going to talk to you about again, how much not only the indirect costs are the direct costs, but kind of sharing and giving you a little bit more on like, how much is this going to be for me? And then finally, that big old why, right? Why am I interested in this school? Is it because it has the programs that I'm interested in? Maybe is it something my family has, like maybe, we're a Husky family here. I know my family, we are quite a few Huskies in our family. Or, maybe there's something else in particular that is attracted to you. And then finally, something that Derek said yesterday that we really loved is dreaming with your eyes open, which means to me is we want you to dream big. And particularly with the students that come into my office or the Career Center there is we're supporting you 100% of the way, but we're also being realistic about sort of the options that you have, and that when you make that determination, you and your family, that you feel comfortable with that choice rather than going like, I'm trying to go to Arizona State because, the warm weather. Like, well, okay, is there anything else? Or are you just going to do that, right? So really making sure that you're dreaming big, that you feel satisfied, but that you're also being realistic. Now, Alex and Derek, did I miss anything with those particular questions that you have?
I think you're good, Mario.
All right. Let's get on with the next slide here. Awesome. So one of the things that's going to be important, and already all of you in this presentation are kind of hitting your marks, is the research involved with making sure that you're finding the schools that you find are going to be a good fit for you. The first one is the school personnel, the college and career coordinators. I know your counselors, those are going to be rather important. I know if there are some community-based organizations, I know Rainer Scholars is one, College Success Foundation, all these other sort of wonderful in-house opportunities for you. I know a lot of these folks similar to me, we've not only gone through the searching of college, but we're kind of in this field for a reason. And that's because we believe in what you're about. So really trying to find those resources and utilizing those resources. And this is what I said normally for all my presentations is you're on the offense, right? Don't wait for that thing to happen. You need to go to them. And so that means similar to folks like Alex or the admissions crew involved, making sure that you're emailing them, that you're calling them, that you're going to college visits, that you're booking your appointments to meet with them. I can tell you that firsthand, they're really cool people, and they want you to succeed, and they want you to chat with them, see if you have any questions. So making sure that you're researching sort of who those officers are and who the territories that you have. At the end of sort of the slideshow is a bunch of databases and resources available for you when it comes to just like, I'm interested in Washington School, maybe computer science, and I'm interested in like somewhere public. And so in those databases, there are schools that are filtered out that can give you a solid idea on what you can actually, what you can discover for you. So really capitalizing on the databases that are there. So again, create a first list and a draft list. So create that list. Create a list that you're interested in. Normally what I have my students do is, again, name, geographical location, is it in-state, public or private, programs that they offer. If there's I do ask, SAT, ACT, what are the admissions requirements of each of the schools? And then of course, having a link, not only to the main website, but also to maybe their YouTube account, their social account, so you can kind of get an idea of what that is. And I always say to some, the families that this is a fluid list, that even though the schools that you have right now, it might not be the school that you end up choosing come May 1st of 2023. I think that's right. Is there anything in particular that I'm missing here, Alex or Derek, that you wanted to give some love to?
Yeah, I can't think of anything else. You know, I think reaching out, and I'll talk a little bit about this in the middle of the presentation, but different universities have different availability with their admissions officers. So one of the first places I would go to is that Find Your Counselor page. Every university, college is probably going to have that, but it definitely varies. So, but yeah, Mario, I think I'm all good on my end.
Okay. All righty. Turn that page. Awesome. I think this is me too. Awesome. And so the very first thing is, remember, you got to get and stay organized, right? You got to show your work. This is the best opportunity for you to show your work. And again, it's not, in my view, it's one of those things, as long as you're kind of putting some information down, that you can really come back to it, that you and in your family can really look and see at the end of the day, when you start combining maybe financial packages, or you start thinking about the offers that have been available to you, you know, that you're organized and that you're staying on top of it. And I know for me, if a student comes to me and they're just like, I'm a little freaked out, I have all this information, I'm more than happy to filter in and help keep you organized. But that's on you. Okay, I'm not gonna do it for everything, but I'm more than happy to help you with that. I think a really cool thing is look for more nuanced traits of each school, right? If it's right by the water, ooh, are you interested in like the dunes? I know that's a really big thing. People like to do that, or maybe there's a particular program out there, or activity that you're really interested. Look for those nuanced traits, as well as not just within the application, making sure that you're reviewing the application to its full, its entirety, right? We want to make sure that when you apply, that you know what is being asked of you, right? And so I think that's a really important thing. Is I think it's, what's that saying, the early bird gets the worm thing. Early is good, but making sure that you're not rushing through this, right? And I know every year we get those kids come March or April, and they're like, I cannot wait to apply to school, and we're like, where you been? So making sure that you're taking a look at that. And then always ask questions, seek out personal opinions about each institution. If that's asking students, if that's asking alumni, and making sure that students, you're the one really forming your opinions on this, making sure that at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to be walking through that door. You're the one that's going to be experiencing what this institution, or what the institutions especially, have to offer. So making sure that you're getting that hashtag real talk when it comes to each and every institution that you're a part of. And then finally, this is something that's a game changer, is if you have the means and opportunity to visit that school, visit that, check out that school. I know there's something to say come, spring or whatnot, especially this summer, if you have a chance to actually come and sit down and see what the classes are all about, see what the campus life and community is like. I know right now UW is gorgeous right now, especially with sort of the heat, the sort of the sunsets that are happening here. So if you haven't had the opportunity to come and visit, please do so. So making sure that you're reviewed up. Is there anything that I missed in that particular section? Are we good to go?
I think we're good to go. Yeah, thanks, Mario.
Awesome.
And I think I'll go ahead and take it from here. Mario had talked briefly about standardized tests, but I really want to echo what Mario said overall as well, that it's important to take time to think about and really reflect on these choices before making your college list. You can create a first draft, but feel free to sit with that draft for a little bit. I know there are some schools, hopefully UW is one of these schools, but it doesn't have to be, where you fall in love instantly with it. But it's important to seek out more nuanced information about their admission policies, financial aid, the environment, and there's lots of great ways to do that. I'm going to talk about two more I guess, granular or specific parts of that. So let's say that you fall in love with University of Washington, or you fall in love with where I went to school for my undergrad, Colorado State University, or maybe a school over east, a smaller liberal arts college like Bowdoin in Maine. There are many different schools, but they probably have many different policies in terms of standardized tests. Because of the pandemic, most colleges across the country no longer mandate standardized tests. And when I say standardized tests, I mean the SAT or the ACT. In the past, even before the pandemic, colleges across the country were using what's called holistic admission or character-based admission, part of this larger character collaborative. This means that even before the pandemic, they were not just looking at your test scores and saying, you have a 1300 SAT, you get in. If you have below that, you're out. There's more information that they're looking at. However, after the pandemic or in response to the pandemic, there are a lot more colleges that have completely dropped the requirement for standardized tests. And there are two different kinds of these colleges, I would say. One are the test optional colleges and universities where you can submit your test scores and they will be considered if you submit them, but there's no requirement or expectation to submit them. And then there's another group, which are called test blind in many cases, which means that even if your test scores are submitted, they are not considered as part of the holistic review. The University of Washington falls into the second group. So we are what's more considered as test blind. In a very small percentage of cases, tests can have an impact, perhaps getting like a second look or something like that in the admission process, but really it's not going to be the make or break for any reason for an admission decision at our university. And really this happens in a fraction of the cases that the applications we look at. Many colleges across the country are doing similar things. I will say a lot of the test blind universities are concentrated more on the West Coast. California is a great example. Both state university systems in California rather, have completely dropped test consideration in the process. So if you're thinking about applying to schools there, that's something to keep in mind. But even outside of California, even outside of Washington, 1,800 schools are not requiring tests for fall 2022 entry. And that is according to fairtest.org. They don't have official numbers yet for what it's going to look like next year, but I do know that many states, including Washington, California, Colorado, I believe Montana, and Iowa and Illinois, not sure about Illinois, but I know the other ones have voted to permanently get rid of the testing requirement. So if you're applying to state schools in those states, they are most likely not going to have standardized tests for the near future or even the far future. So all that is to say, you are more than your test scores. There's lots of other things that colleges are looking at, but when you're trying to make that decision, one question to ask an admission counselor is does your school consider tests if they are submitted? And some colleges will say no, like us. So that is to say that it's fine to not take these tests. You definitely can, and I think there has been an uptick in the amount of students taking the ACT over last year. But for really most colleges that you're going to apply to, it is not a requirement. And I can speak from experience that if you do not submit a test score at a majority of these institutions, it's not going to negatively affect your application at all. So something to consider. Again, great to ask an individual admission counselors, because what is common for most colleges might not be common for your colleges on your list. So when you're creating that college list, if you're asking counselors these questions and you get answers that aren't compatible with your resources, your means, the amount of time that you can spend on these tests, then that's something to consider when you're building that list. Colleges do look at the SAT and ACT equally. One thing that, again, another great thing to ask counselors is if they will look at the composite, or I guess the overall, what's called a super score of these tests. So if you take the SAT multiple times and you do really well on the math part the first time and not too well on the reading and writing part, and then maybe the second time you take it, it flips and like you do really well on the reading and writing part, but not on the math part. Sometimes colleges will do what's called super scoring, where they will take the best score for each of those categories. Not all colleges do this, however, and it varies from SAT to ACT. Typically, the SAT is super scored more often than the ACT. So another great thing to ask an admission counselor, but colleges use what are called equivalency or concordance charts to basically say if you have this on the SAT, it equals this on the ACT. So they do look at them equally. The most important thing to do is to not overstretch your bounds or your resources. There are free resources to prepare. Both the ACT and College Board, which does the SAT, have resources as well. Ask your high schools, other organizations. Derek works for a great organization, Rainier Scholars. Mario, people like Mario in high schools might have resources as well that can help you prepare. So definitely making sure to ask. And I will talk about more of these resources at the end of the presentation. If you're practicing more than 10 hours, then you might see diminishing returns on the score that you get. Some people, you can practice for 100 hours, and some people do. But the most important thing here is to not overstretch your bounds and your resources, because again, colleges in most cases are not going to require these, and it's not going to negatively impact your application if you choose not to submit them for any reason. So that's the first part. The second part is what to do on a visit. So Mario has talked about some great general things to consider when you're creating a college list. I talked about standardized tests and how that can affect certain college decisions based on if they're test blind, test optional, or if they require tests. Like some colleges actually have reinstated the test requirement, like MIT. Another thing to consider is how to maximize your visits. So as Mario said, visiting, if you can do it, is a great way to hear it basically from the students, the staff, the faculty themselves. But there are many ways to do this. And during the pandemic, colleges on the whole have opened up the ways that they do this as well. I am preaching to the choir here because you all are on a Zoom call, so you probably know you can connect with colleges virtually as well as in person. This is a great way to not only, I guess, get different experiences than that you might get in person, but it also allows you to look at a wider slate of colleges at the beginning. If you were trying to narrow down a college list of 20 or 30 colleges, you probably are not going to have time to visit them all in person, but you can get some tea or coffee and sit down in your bedroom and join a presentation like this, and maybe this can help make your college decision. The programs, place, and people are the 3 Ps that this presentation talks about. Programs is, it could be academic programs, but it could also be student support programs too. Many colleges, especially in the last 20 or 30 years, have invested and reinvested in programs that they increase student success. So that could either be mental health resources, it could be social resources, it could be academic resources. These are great things to research when you're on your visit, and ask your tour guides, ask your admission professionals, what kinds of resources do you have here, but as well as finding out what majors do they offer. If you're thinking about pursuing nursing and the college you're applying to doesn't offer nursing, then you can probably cross that off of your list. The place, as Mario had said, is an important thing to consider as well, down to the nitty gritty, like is it by water, but also things like, is it in an area of the country where I want to live? Is it close to family, if that's important to me? Is it not close to family, if that's important to me? So lots of things to consider there. And then the people as well too, either in a virtual, and I think this is probably a little bit easier in an in-person visit, talking to people and seeing, talking to as many people as you can, and kind of getting a vibe from them as well. Seeing too, most colleges have students that work directly in the admission office or in some kind of visit office. And these, even though these are paid students in most cases, they went to this school, they are going through this process that you want to go through, so it's great to talk to them as well. And because I know that as an admission person, I have had a really bad day on certain days. Don't judge a book by its cover, I would say. There could be somebody who just, maybe the tour guide is having a bad day, or something doesn't happen right, or it rains that day. Maybe it doesn't rain all the time. Maybe you visited Seattle in November, and then you visit again in June, and you're like, whoa, it's super sunny outside. So just don't judge on one point. Try to get as many points as you can to make that informed decision. I'm going to talk about demonstrated interest in a second, but I think just taking notes and preparing questions to ask these professionals is important as well. The last point here I want to discuss is demonstrated interest. This is a great question to ask anybody in admission, any admission counselor that you see, because it can help you understand what will give you the best shot at putting your best foot forward for the application. Some colleges consider what's called demonstrated interest, which means if you're going to tours, if you're going on the website, if you're emailing people, doing admission interviews, is that something that they can consider in the admission process? For some colleges, it is yes. For most, or not most necessarily, because I don't have exact numbers, but for other colleges like our college, the University of Washington, we do not consider demonstrated interest. One thing to consider, one strategy is, if you find out from an admission counselor that yes, we do consider demonstrated interest, perhaps, and you do want to go there, perhaps you can prioritize those places to go in person. And for those that, it's more just about getting information, go if you can, but it's not going to make a difference in the admission process either way. Finally, and then we'll throw it over to Derek for the last part of the presentation. This is an example of a college visit checklist that a previous panelist, whose name is Kelly, talked about last year in this presentation. This is from College Counseling at University Prep Handbook, but I can provide other resources, and I will at the end of the presentation, about ways to get certain notes like this. But hopefully this helps helps you visualize the things to ask for and the things to organize during your college visit. So there's things on the to-do checklist, like talking to professors, visiting the library, touring campus. Not all of these are going to be available depending on when you go. For instance, you might not be able to talk to professors if you choose to visit on a weekend, or perhaps, especially during COVID, you might not be able to go into buildings. That might not even be an option for you if you visit in person. If you are visiting virtually, there might be more limited interaction with professors, or there might be a lot more interaction with professors. It depends on the resources that the college has. So you can do this for both virtual and in person. These are also great things to ask. A lot of the things that I talked about in my about 10 minutes of talking are on this graphic organizer as well. Is the school test optional? Is it test blind? Some contact information for admissions professionals, talking to people, thinking about the food, the town, the area. Is it rural? Is it urban? Is it near the mountains? Is it near the sea? There's all sorts of things that you can consider, and it definitely prioritizes asking students. Again, if you have a hard time finding students, they work in the admissions office in most cases, so they would be happy to talk to you either through email or in person. One last thing that I will say here is there's two fields, one for mean GPA and one for acceptance percentage. So because many colleges across the country use a holistic admission model, even if you have a certain GPA, it does not mean that there is a cutoff GPA in many cases, or like if you have below a 3.0 or something, then you have no chance of getting in. It is like that at some colleges, but increasingly, when we're looking at personal characteristics and things like that, it becomes part of the picture rather than the entire picture. So keep that in mind when you were trying to figure out what is the average GPA of students who were admitted here. because in your case, you could have below that GPA and still be a very successful applicant. Similarly, for acceptance percentage, this could vary by college, by department, by residency at the University of Washington. Because we are a public Washington university, we admit Washington state residents at a higher rate than we do non-residents. And that's because of the primary population that we serve. So if you see just one admission percentage for the university, that might not necessarily apply to your circumstance. And with that, I'm going to turn over the rest of the presentation over to Derek.
Hey, thanks, Alex. And yeah, those are definitely some great points. I think that last one is really crucial and something I tell my students, just that differential in admission. So you really have to go beyond the averages in some cases. So wanted to chat a bit about financial aid. And I know for a lot of students and for parents, this is something that's at the top of mind when approaching the college search. And, I think this could honestly be its own presentation in and of itself. But today we just wanted to give you kind of a starting point and some context for different aspects of the financial aid process, some of the basics, and, definitely can answer questions as well in the Q&A. But just want to provide some takeaways and some context setting for as you kind of begin this process, depending on where you're at. The first term we look at, and I think that's important and not talked about enough, is the net price. And that's the amount that a student would pay to attend a school for a single year after subtracting scholarships and grants, so free money, gift aid that you'd receive. And oftentimes, students and families focus on the sticker price, and the media has really focused on the sticker price, right? These rising college costs. And while there's some truth to that, the net price is actually more important. You can find some of the most expensive schools in the country that provide some of the best financial aid that reduce the cost to where it's comparable to some community colleges. You might find, I think UW does a great job with Husky Promise in reducing the cost and covering tuition for certain students through state aid. So you really have to look at the net price and not focus on that sticker price. Few students and families pay the sticker price. It happens a little more at public institutions at times, but even there, you're going to see a different mix of financial aid opportunities. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. You might be asking, how do you get that net price, right? You'll only see the schools publishing the sticker price. That's where a net price calculator can be a really great tool. And it's something that's underutilized, I think, for students and families. It's really like filling out a very quick and dirty financial aid form. Few questions, takes about 10 to 15 minutes. Every school has one. If you search for it, just type in net price calculator on the school's website. It'll take you there. And UW's actually is a really good starting point, I think. It's pretty straightforward. And this calculator just provides the opportunity to put in information like the parent's income, family size, your GPA, a few other financial components, and then it'll spit out a number and give you a sense of what the school will be able to provide for you. And so it'll be an estimate. So, if you're thinking about it like going to a Mariners game, it will, you walk in the ballpark, it'll tell you kind of what section you're sitting in, but it won't tell you the exact seat number. That's one way to think about it. But it's a great starting place, particularly for the college search, in that using it allows you to see, is this school just way out of what my family can afford, way outside of that? And that might help you sift through all of those schools you might be considering. So it's really valuable even on the front end. And so regardless of what grade you're in, if you're going into senior year, going into junior year, even if you're earlier than that, this can be a really great tool to use. Looking at the cost of attendance, pretty straightforward. It's kind of the full cost of a year of attendance at a college. So that's going to factor in not only tuition, but room and board, student fees, and then indirect costs, which Mario referenced earlier, that are more estimates. They're not actually billed by the school. So things like books, personal expenses, like pizza on a Friday night, transportation, that all varies depending on your spending habits, where you're coming from. So the school doesn't actually bill you for those, but you need to know you have to cover them, right? And so knowing that cost of attendance, it's more than just tuition. I think a lot of folks focus on the word tuition, but it's more than that, even if you are planning to live at home. So there's factors to consider. Expected family contribution, that the name of that is actually going to change to student aid index. That's why I included it there too. So you should see that change. It's not available now, but when you go to fill out forms for those of you who are going to be seniors in October, you should see that change. And the expected family contribution is really the number used to determine eligibility for student aid. So it's really kind of trying to measure your family's financial strength. It's different than willingness to contribute, right? We would all want to not have to contribute anything, but that's not how the federal government sees it. So and keep that in mind. It's an important number to know, the EFC or SAI. And when you subtract the cost of attendance by that EFC, that's the amount of need-based aid you'd be eligible for. So that's going to, again, help determine your eligibility for aid from a college. And the big thing with that is that even if you have a low expected family contribution, that does not mean that the school will meet your full need, right? They may give you some aid, but not up to that expected family contribution point. So that's another reason why those net price calculators are so important, is they give you a sense if you know, how much a school is going to offer you, and you know, is that going to be doable for my family and I? That's something to think about. We can go on to the next slide. And here we're going to look at the different types of financial aid. So pretty straightforward, but I think really important to delineate between them. You know, the grants and scholarships are free money. And so with grants, they typically are need-based, and they're awarded by the state, the federal government, and institutions themselves. So you'll see, and that's typically at private colleges. They have more room to do that than public institutions, which funding tends to come more from federal and state aid, but not exclusively. Some examples of this are the Pell Grant for low-income students and families, the Washington College Grant for low and middle-income families, and then there might be other grants, named grants for, you know, the school's mascot grant, you know, insert school here, grant that they provide, again, at a lot private schools. So it'll be something you see, and those are determined based on what you fill out on the FAFSA. So again, using that EFC, and then the CSS profile, which is another financial aid form we'll highlight later. Scholarships are oftentimes merit-based or based on a specific interest, right, in a specific major or program, and they're awarded by the college, and then sometimes from outside companies and private organizations. One thing to note about the grants and scholarships is that most free money is going to come from the colleges, the state, or the federal government. It is rare that a student is able to bring in a ton of outside scholarship aid without having that impact your financial aid from your school. So, you know, you really want to focus on that FAFSA and CSS profile, getting the financial aid forms done, finding schools that are going to meet a higher percentage of your need from the get-go. That, you know, there's not going to be this kind of magical scholarship that comes through. I think for students who maybe don't qualify for aid, those outside scholarships become more important. But for students who do qualify for, say, Pell Grant and others, doing the financial aid forms is more important than searching for scholarships. It's a little different than what you might hear, but in my experience, that's what I've seen kind of across different income levels. So it definitely depends on where you're at, but really focus on where is that, you know, how much is that school in terms of need, how much are they meeting? Another piece, component of the financial aid award you'll see is work study. So that's working a job on campus, typically about 10 to 15 hours a week. Some of it's based on need for federal work study, and then there's non-federal work study jobs as well. The amount of earnings for that throughout a year can be about $2,500 to $6,000. Some of that depends on minimum wage at the school and where they're located. So another way to help fund your education. And you know, that 10 to 15 hours is doable, right? You do have a lot more time in college in some respects, right? If you're living on campus, you're not commuting. So there's time that you have to do that. So some ways it can be a way to organize yourself and have something concrete in your schedule to schedule around in addition to your classes. And then loans, I think, you know, we hear a lot, it's borrowed money, so it must be paid back with interest. That's really important to know. Most of those loans are going to come from the federal government, so student loans and then parent loans. I suggest using student loans first because the interest rate is lower. The repayment period is longer. You don't start paying until 6 months after you graduate from college. So there's some benefits to that. Parent loans are a little different, but with higher interest rates and repayment terms. I would say there's also private loans, but I would say don't bother with those. I think at that point, you should really evaluate if the school is a financial fit for you. I think that's kind of a whole nother ball of wax. And I think that, a lot of the horror stories you hear for student loans tend to be related to private loans or graduate school. You're actually, as undergraduate students, restricted on what you can borrow. So you don't have as much room to borrow as a student who maybe is 24 years or older, or looking at grad school where you could pay for the whole thing. You're not actually able to do that. And UW actually does a good job in terms of graduating students with less debt than many institutions. So again, some things to consider, just kind of wanted to provide the scope of different components of a financial aid award. Yeah, if we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, and so here, just wanted to highlight some of the important forms you need to know. And again, these are crucial if you're looking for aid in your search process. And I think even if you're unsure, I would say just go ahead and fill them out. It's worth it. You're not going to be at a disadvantage for filling out these forms. The first is the FAFSA. So the free application for federal student aid. This is a free form, and it's a government form. So you want to make sure that the URL has a .gov address. This is simpler. The URL is actually really long. They lengthened it a lot. So if you do FAFSA.gov, you'll get redirected to the longer URL. So it's just easy to remember. And this is how you get some of those grants. This is how you get access to student loans. So there's some pieces there that really allow you to be eligible for the wide variety of aid in addition to the grants and scholarships schools might offer. The thing with this is you'll use 2021 tax data for this upcoming year. So they use it what they call prior years. So they'll look at your tax information from essentially 2 years from when the form you're applying for. So that way it's a little easier than in the past to have that information ready. So you want to make sure you work with your parents to get that information ready. Especially if you're a senior going into the fall, that's a good thing to chat with your parents about, is just start organizing their tax forms, and so you can have those to fill out the FAFSA. And then WASFA is for DACA undocumented students here in Washington State, so the Washington application for state financial aid. So students with that status will still have access to state aid. So that's really crucial. So we're really fortunate that our state is very generous in that regard. So that Washington College grant is the key grant you'd be applying for. So you definitely want to apply there. Again, that's not everyone's going to use WASFA, but I want to highlight that form. Most colleges require FAFSA, so you're going to plan on doing FAFSA. For CSS Profile, that's a longer form that's a little like a FAFSA plus in a sense. It's run by the same people who do the SAT, the College Board. Not every school is going to ask you to do that. In Washington State, for example, Whitman's the only school that asks you to submit CSS Profile. So it's more if you're applying to Ivy League schools, a school like, let's say USC, out-of-state private schools that tend to be more selective but offer really good financial aid, they oftentimes require CSS Profile. They really want to be sure they're giving money to the right people, and so they really want to ask more specific questions than the FAFSA. So they want to really drill down a little bit more. So it's a little longer, a little more tedious, but again, it can be worth it if you're getting good financial aid. So make sure to check with the school on the school site if they require your CSS Profile. Institution-specific forms for domestic students here in the U.S., probably less likely that you'll encounter those. But if we do have any international students, there may be additional forms you submit that are specific to the institution. I believe University of Chicago has their own form that they use for financial aid. But generally, focus on FAFSA and in some cases CSS Profile. But starting, this will be available October 1st. So that's something to put in your calendar. That's really important. And if your parents are bugging you, or if we have any parents on the call as well, this is a great way to help a student out or to get help from your parents. This is, if they can kind of hone in on the FAFSA part, that's a really great task that they can take off your plate, especially as you go through the process of applying and researching schools. The fall can get busy, so that's a great way to kind of use your support network. We'll go ahead and move to the next slide. And one thing I did want to mention too is just deadlines. So January tends to be the most common place where you'll common deadline for financial aid forms. Again, if you're applying early decision to the school, though, you're going to want to get those financial aid forms in sooner at the same time you apply as the application deadline. So just keep that in mind. Typically you'll get offers in the spring. I think UW releases late March. So you'll see most colleges around that time, somewhere in March, leading up to that decision point and by May 1st. So just a little sense of the timeline. But some of the key takeaways I think that are really important. We talked a bit about that net price calculator. I think using that is crucial. Again, regardless of what stage you're at, I think if you're a senior, junior, sophomore, freshman, using that or having your parents do it, again, that's a great task for parents to do. The family discussion, I think, is really important, really being real. Again, that real talk that Mario talked about, talking with parents about, hey, what can we afford as a family? What's realistic? Hope isn't really a strategy in these situations. You really want to go in with a clear sense of what's possible. The more you delay that, the more wasted effort there could be when you could make maybe different decisions on the front end. So you want to put yourself in the best position from the get-go. Again, talking with your counselors, that can be a great tool to help with that, really understanding what have schools' awarding patterns been, how do I get through these forms, really leverage your counselors in these situations. I think that they can be a really big help in that and really give you a sense of what to expect, or just to help you talk through or troubleshoot, just so you feel like you're not alone. Balanced college list, so Mario referenced that earlier. When you apply to schools that are reach, target, and likely, you also want to apply it to schools that are going to be affordable in similar categories. So you want to, financial aid is actually a balanced college list is actually a great financial aid strategy. So really thinking about where am I going to apply and maximize my chances for aid. Oftentimes that looks like for our students who apply out of state and in-state, we ask them to apply to some in-state public schools, even if they want to go out of state, just so they can see what a package from an in-state school would look like. If we have students who are only looking in-state, we'll want them to apply to private schools and public schools just so they can get options and see, where they might get the best aid package. And lastly, talking with the financial aid office can be really helpful. Again, with questions on different forms, if they're asking you for additional documentation, really asking them for clarification on what they need. That's their job, and they'd be happy to help. I think you want to look at what's the best medium to contact them on. And so looking at their site is a great way to do that. They can also help with appeals if there's anything you need. If family circumstances have changed, I know with COVID, that's been a big topic of conversation. So know that colleges know that, and they're there to help. So really use that financial aid office at the different schools to assist you.
All right. Derek, anything else there?
No, I think we're all set here.
Sounds good. Well, I know that we are nearing the end of our talk here, so I wanted to put the resources up on the screen so that you could see some things that we highly encourage you to visit if you want more information from different virtual visits from UVisit or understanding more about majors. We have a major tool at UW Majors, different rankings and different, not necessarily rankings, but ways to understand different schools like niche. There was one question, and I don't see any other questions in the Q&A at this point, but there's one question with the limited time that we have right now that I would like to ask both of you sort of as a parting question. How many schools should go into my list? If I'm creating a list, what does a balanced list look like? How many schools are in that list? Now, either of you can take that or both.
I can start. As a base, and some of it depends on who you are as a student, how much support you have. But I think I talk to our students and just because it's simple, not quite the rule of thirds, but it's 3, 3, and 3, right? 3 reach, 3 target, 3 likely. I think that mix can look different depending on where you're at in terms of your academic credentials. I think when you start getting beyond kind of 10, you really have to be judicious about what schools, why they're on there. Are the applications easy enough? I mean, you can get into 25, 30 schools, but you're just delaying the work in terms of deciding till later. When if you do that work on the front end, it can be a little easier. But I would suggest at the bare minimum, you want 4 is I would say the bare minimum. I think you're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table if you're going under 4. Personally, so I typically recommend 9. It kind of splits the difference between you know, kind of 7, which was, you know, we saw as an average for many students, and going up kind of in double digits. So I think that's a starting place, and then having some reasons why you want to go beyond that. So, and there's definitely some legit reasons, but I think you want to make sure to have some reasons for that. And, you know, financial aid is a great one, but, you know, again, you want to keep it doable.
Thank you, Derek. And Mario, in our last minute, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think Derek, you nailed it. And I think something is by keeping it well balanced, come decision time or come when, you know, you start getting offers, if you put like majority of your schools in the reach and they say no to you, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm scrambling to try and find the safety or, you know, other schools. So by having a well-balanced sort of meal, a well-balanced meal, so to speak, you can find yourself in a good spot. So yeah, completely agree.
Perfect. Well, thank you both. I am seeing, I know we're basically at time here, and I'm happy to address any other questions in the Q&A. But if we didn't get to your question, if you had a question and you would like to ask it again, I highly encourage that you email us at askuwadm@uw.edu. Mario and Derek, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a real pleasure and really useful information and insight from both of you. So thank you again.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having us, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you guys as well for coming.
Yeah, thank all of you as well. Have a great rest of your day. I'll stick around for a second to type in the Q&A, but have a wonderful day, everyone.
Take care.